1993. In order to catch a gang of robbers operating on a train from Beijing to Moscow, the Chinese authorities create a hit squad of representatives of several departments with an experienced investigator Cui Zhenhai at the head. During the trip to Moscow, the police find themselves in the epicenter of another robbery, but let the bandits go in order to follow their trail to find their leader. Meanwhile, the leader is preparing for a bigger raid. He is going to intercept the money that the Moscow casino transports through underground tunnels that are part of the sewer system of the Russian capital. Operation Moscow is based on the true story of a series of train robberies from Beijing to Moscow that took place in the early 1990s. Because the train traveled through 3 different countries, it was not escorted by Chinese police, so individual cases of theft and robbery eventually turned into outright raids in which heavily armed bandits robbed, raped and maimed passengers. Gao Yan, a Nanjing official, was gang-raped 3 times in one trip. And on May 26 of 1993, the train was robbed by 4 different gangs. Chinese filmmakers have taken up this theme before. In 2018, the series Operation Moscow was made, in which Chinese and Russian police officers joined forces to stop this arbitrariness. Operation Moscow from 2023 is a feature-length action film, the creators of which take train robberies only as a starting point. Director Herman Yau and screenwriter Chen Daming take the action on the streets of Moscow, then in underground tunnels, then in the luxurious interiors of the Moscow theater, and end it all in the classic traditions of the genre, in some abandoned plant. In theory it should provide the movie with variety and spectacle, but in practice it turns out to be just the opposite. The most spectacular are the first 2 action scenes on the train, the tension in which is intensified by the confined space. Of course, there is also a lot to see in Operation Moscow, but the authors fail to reach the highest bar set by these first episodes, and this inevitably affects the overall impression of the movie. It can be seen that the authors have been busy with reconstruction of that time. They recreated Moscow streets of the early 90s, obligatory for that time markets, and populated the frame with dozens and hundreds of extras, but for those who grew up in Russia of those years, the falseness and fakery still catch the eye. The unfamiliarity of the supposedly Moscow architecture, the motley clothing of ordinary Russians, the lack of recognizable signage and texture, and, of course, the creepy accents cut the eye. On the action side, it is upsetting that the wounds in the movie, as Herman Yau often does in all his projects, are drawn with the help of CGI, and the splashes of computer blood still look as unrealistic as possible. The main roles in the film are given to veteran actors, but Zhang Hanyu, who plays the head of the police squad, does not show anything unusual, and Huang as the leader of the bandits Miao Qingshan at times strongly overplaying, copying Gary Oldman from Leon, or Christoph Waltz from Inglourious Bastard. The heart of the movie is Andy Lau, who portrays a former criminal named Vasily, who lives in Moscow and helps the gangsters with their plans, as he wants to free his daughter, whom Miao Qingshan is holding hostage. His character appears in the story last, but in the finale it is his line that comes to the fore, and it is also difficult to recognize this as a successful decision. To summarize, Operation Moscow is one of those films that are made fairly, but by people who are periodically let down by their talent. In the 90s, Herman Yau was considered a master of Hong Kong exploitation thrash, where a sense of taste and measure are not always required, but now he makes a completely different movies, ideologically correct and expensive mainstream, and in these movies you need clarity and calculation, as well as a bright author's touch is highly desirable, but Operation Moscow unfortunately lacks all of this.